237Ciampach2, the author of Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. In this video lecture, we will talk about Chapter 2, Malware and Social Engineering Attacks. There are many different types of attacks: viruses, worms, trojans, rootkits, botnets, and even more. In this chapter, we will explore these different types of attacks as well as categorize them to help us see how they are alike and how they are different. In addition, we'll look at perhaps the most successful types of attacks, which actually do not use technology at all, but instead are based on trickery, called social engineering attacks. Remember, stay secure.
Chapter 2, Malware and Social Engineering Attacks. Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. Our objectives in this lecture video: we want to describe the differences between a virus and a worm. We'll list the types of malware that conceal its appearance. We'll identify different types of malware that's designed for profit. We'll look at the types of social engineering psychological attacks and physical social engineering attacks. We'll begin by talking about attacks that use malware. Malicious software, sometimes just called malware, actually refers to a wide variety of software that can be damaging and sometimes annoying. That is to say, some of this malware is designed to just annoy us, but other times the software is designed to actually be harmful and damaging. Malware, by definition, enters a computer system without my knowledge or my consent, and then it performs its unwanted action. Now, with all the different types of malware out there, is there a way in which we can classify these different types of malware? Can we create some categories and place similar types of malware within these categories? And there have been various attempts to do so. One which perhaps is most beneficial is to classify malware by its primary objective. Now we'll pause right here and say oftentimes malware has multiple objectives. But if we look at its primary objective, then we can create 3 different categories, and within these categories place the different types of malware. One category is that which has the objective to very rapidly infect other computers. Another type of malware has the primary objective to conceal its purpose. And yet another type of malware has as its objective to make a profit for its owners. Now, once again, malware that conceals its purpose may also want to make a profit for its owners. Not to say that one type of malware can't fit multiple of these categories, but when we look at its primary objectives, we can place different types of malware in these different categories. We'll begin with the type of malware that is most common among users. Common in terms of they've heard of it, but its frequency is not what it once was, and that is a virus. A biological virus is an agent that reproduces itself inside a cell, and when the cell is infected by the virus takes over the operation of that cell, and in essence converts that cell into like a cell factory to make more copies of it. The cell may be forced to produce thousands or millions of identical copies of the original virus, and it does so very rapidly. In fact, sometimes biologists say that a virus only exists in order to make more viruses. A computer virus, or sometimes just called a virus, is malicious computer code that has some similarities to its biological counterpart in that it wants to reproduce itself on the same computer. A virus first inserts itself into a computer file, typically a program file, could be a data file, and this insertion can be done in several different ways. The appender infection, or the appender insertion, In this, the virus appends itself to the end of the file, and then it moves the first 3 bytes of the original code to the virus code, and then replaces them with a jump instruction that points to the virus code. So what happens is, when the program is launched, that jump instruction takes over and redirects control down to the virus, which has appended itself to the end. Perhaps this figure may help explain. What happens is, the virus code appends itself to the end of the file, and then in the original program file, it replaces the first 3 bytes of the code with a jump instruction, and that jump instruction points down to the virus code. So what happens, of course, is when the program is launched, then that jump instruction transfers control down to the virus code, which has appended itself to the end of the file. There's one type of way in which a virus inserts itself into a computer file. Another type is what's called the Swiss cheese infection. Now, some viruses inject themselves into the program's executable code instead of at the end of the file, and any overwritten original code is then transferred and stored within the virus code for proper execution after the program has been infected. Here's an example of that Swiss cheese infection, and we can see that the jump instruction goes to one piece, to another piece, to another piece, and then actually hits our virus code. A third way in which a virus inserts itself into a computer file is what's called a split infection. Here the virus splits itself into different parts, and the parts really are placed at random positions throughout the host program, and it overwrites the original contents of the host. The overwritten parts are stored at the end of the file, and then a table is used to reference their locations. So the head of the virus code starts in the beginning of the file, gives command to the next piece of the virus code, and on and on. And here's an example of that split infection, if you would. Now, whenever this infected program, and by the way, there are about 20 different ways in which these infections can take place. We just looked at the appender, the Swiss cheese, and the split infection. Whenever the infected program is launched, or maybe the file is opened by the user or the computer's operating system, the virus springs into action. First of all, it tries to reproduce itself by inserting its code into another file on the same computer. And then it unloads a malicious payload and performs some type of action. Now, a virus can do something that's simply annoying, like maybe display a message, maybe it's political in nature or something like that. Or it can do something much more harmful. It may cause the computer to repeatedly crash, may erase files, may even reformat the hard drive, could turn off the computer's security settings. Here's an example of one of those just annoying messages. Now, it's important to know that a virus does not automatically spread to another computer. When a virus infects a computer, it looks for infections on that same system. It doesn't spread automatically to another computer. Instead, a virus relies on the action of users in order to spread. Viruses are attached to files, and when those files then are spread by some type of human action, the virus will spread to another computer. I might have an infected file on my computer, put in a flash drive, copy that file to the flash drive, give the flash drive to a friend. The friend then copies that, or then takes that flash drive and inserts it in her computer, and then all of a sudden her computer is infected. She may then send that infected file as an email attachment to a third person, and of course then their computer gets infected. So the point is, a virus has to have human help in order to jump from computer to computer. It doesn't do it by itself. There are different types of computer viruses, some more common than others. A program virus infects an executable program with a .exe extension. So whenever the program is launched, the virus is activated, sure. Actually, there are about 70 different Microsoft Windows file extensions that could potentially contain a virus. A macro virus is somewhat different. A macro virus is written in a script known as a macro, and a macro is just a series of instructions that really are grouped together as a single command. And they're often used to automate a complex set of tasks or a repetitive series of tasks. Macros can be written in a macro language like Visual Basic for Applications, VBA. And they're actually stored within the user document, like an Excel spread worksheet. Now, the macro virus really kind of takes advantage of a trusting relationship between the application Excel and the operating system, Microsoft Windows. Well, once that user document is opened, macro and virus instructions execute, and then they infect the computer. As an aside, this is one reason why you want to be very careful whenever you get a document from someone that you're perhaps not expecting. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, that type of thing. Could have a macro virus in it. So the bottom line is, anytime you get a document that's an attachment, resist the urge to just open it all of a sudden. A resident virus. A resident virus is located in random access memory, RAM, every time the computer is turned on, and it infects files that are opened by the user or the operating system. Now, these next two types are rather rare today. Boot virus infects the master boot record of a hard drive. Now, the master boot record contains the program that's needed for the computer to start up, and it has a description of how the hard drive is organized. Instead of damaging individual files, a boot virus is designed to harm the hard drive itself. These are rarely found today. Companion viruses were common when we used the command prompt instead of the graphical user interface, clicking on icons. With the companion virus, there may be a program on my system called notepad.exe. An attacker may put out there or distribute another program called notepad.com. COM is a file extension that was used in a file type that was found in older type of Microsoft Windows versions. But because Windows carries along such legacy, anytime someone types notepad, Windows would automatically first try to launch the .com version, and then if it were not available, it would then launch the .exe version, if it could find it. The point is, Windows would first search for a .com and execute it, so an attacker would write a companion virus and try to have that file placed on a computer so that whenever the user typed notepad, the COM file would automatically launch, and lo and behold, the infection would take place. Now, because we use graphical user interfaces today instead of command lines, thankfully, this type of virus is fairly rare. So, one type of malware that has as its primary purpose to spread to other computers is a virus. Another type of malware whose primary purpose is to spread is that of a worm. Now, a worm still is a malicious program, but the worm's designed to take advantage of some sort of vulnerability that might be in an application or an operating system. And it takes advantage of that vulnerability to enter the computer. Now, once the worm has exploited the vulnerability on one system, it then immediately searches for another computer that has the same vulnerability so it can exploit that vulnerability and enter that computer. So in effect, a worm uses a network to send copies of itself to all other devices that are connected to the network. Now, some worms initially were designed simply to spread quickly and not corrupt the systems they infected. And maybe they only slowed down the network by replicating themselves. Yet newer worms can leave behind a payload on the system, and these payloads can infect and cause harm, very similar to a virus. Some of the examples of what a worm can do: might delete computer files, might allow the remote control of a computer by an attacker, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Here's an example, a table rather I should say, of the differences between viruses and worms. How does it spread to other computers? With a virus, it has some sort of human interaction. With a worm, it simply does it on its own. A virus infects through inserting code into a file, whereas a worm exploits a vulnerability in an application or operating system. A virus has to have some sort of user action in order to spread, whereas a worm does not. A virus typically is not remote control, but a worm could be. So there again, it's different how viruses and worms replicate. A virus self-replicates on the same local computer, but not to other computers. A worm, on the other hand, will self-replicate between computers, from one to the other. Let's now move to the second category of malware. We looked at malware whose primary purpose was to spread. Now let's look at malware whose primary purpose is to conceal. And we'll begin by talking about Trojans. A Trojan, or just Trojan horse, is actually based on an ancient legend about the Greeks winning the Trojan War by hiding their soldiers in a large, hollow wooden horse presented as a gift to the city of Troy. A computer Trojan is an executable program that advertises that it performs one activity, but really does something else, or may perform both the advertised as well as the malicious activity. You know, a user may download a free calendar program. But when that calendar program is launched, in addition to installing the calendar, that program scans the system for credit card numbers, passwords, and then it connects through the network to a remote system and transmits that information to the attacker. So Trojans are typically executable programs that contain hidden code that launches an attack. Now, as we said, the Trojan then transmits information through the network. So its goal is to conceal. Now, another type of malware whose goal is to conceal is that known as a rootkit. A rootkit is software that's used by an attacker to hide itself. To hide itself so that it can't be found either by the user or can't be found by, say, antivirus software or other anti-malware software that might be on the system. Now, a rootkit hides itself and it removes any trace of login entries or login records. It could alter or even replace operating system files with its own modified versions. And it's specifically designed to ignore malicious activity. That is to say, it's designed so that when it infects a system, that system ignores the malicious activity. Not that the rootkit ignores the malicious activity, but it's designed so that the infected system ignores any sort of malicious activity. If my system is infected with a rootkit, how can I find that out? And what can I do? Well, sometimes, and we'll say sometimes, a rootkit can be detected using programs that actually compare file contents with original files. But often a rootkit operates at an operating system very low level, and so detecting it can be very difficult. But even more so, getting rid of a rootkit, the removal of a rootkit, is likewise very difficult. A rootkit has to be entirely erased, but because it infects at such a low level of the operating system, that sometimes can be very difficult. Oftentimes, if my system is infected with a rootkit, what I have to do simply is to reformat the hard drive and reinstall the entire operating system. Not a pleasant thing to consider, but a rootkit has its claws so deeply into the operating system, it's very difficult to eradicate it. Can't just go in and try to erase a few files. Logic bombs. Again, we're still talking about the category of malware that conceals itself. A logic bomb is computer code that lies dormant, yet is triggered by some type of logical event that may occur. One logic bomb example would be a computer programmer works at a large organization, and this computer programmer decides that he is going to insert into this program that he's writing this instruction. If his name is removed and no longer found on the list of current employees, meaning he probably got fired, then the program is instructed to then go out and wreak havoc by erasing, let's say, all of the files that pertain to human resource or something like that. Well, the point is that this logic bomb springs into action when some sort of logical event occurs. In this example, the employee's name no longer is found on the list of current employees. It's triggered by a specific logical event and performs this malicious action. It's difficult to detect, logic bombs are, simply because programs, of course, are so very lengthy in nature that it's not uncommon at all to have programs that are 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 lines of code, and slipping in just a couple of lines may not be as difficult as it may appear. We'll look at some examples in just a moment. Another type of malware that conceals itself is called a backdoor. When a programmer writes an application, of course, in the testing phase, they would like to bypass some of the security provisions. That is to say, I write an application, and every time the application launches, it asks for the username and password. If I'm testing that program over and over and over, I may find it bothersome to have to enter a username and password every time. So in the testing phase, I include what's called a backdoor. This is code that circumvents that normal security and gives full access. The idea is that once the program is finally finished, I'm going to remove this backdoor so that no one can circumvent that security. However, there are many instances where software has been developed and released with the backdoor still there. So of course what happens is, an individual who knows that the backdoor exists can then access it by circumventing the security. We talked about logic bombs a few minutes ago. Here are some celebrated examples of logic bomb. One was individual in financial services put a logic bomb that that caused 1,000 computers to delete their critical data. Another was at a defense contractor. Another was at a health services firm. What's interesting about logic bombs is more often than not they are done by insiders. This is not the sort of thing that someone from the outside might typically do, although it can be done, but more often we find logic bombs have been written by those individuals who are inside the organization. Now, we've talked about malware that spreads, we've talked about malware that conceals. Now let's move to the third category of malware. This is malware that is primarily designed to profit. Again, as we said, this doesn't mean that malware that conceals may not have a profit motive. Many times it does. But the primary emphasis of the malware, looking at these three categories, is that of profit in this third category. And we're going to talk about botnets, spyware, adware, and keyloggers. A botnet, we'll back up. A computer that is infected so that it could be remotely controlled by an attacker is called a zombie computer. When we take hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of these zombie computers and form them into a logical computer network that's under the control of the attacker, this creates what is known as a botnet. So, a botnet is made up of multiple zombie computers, all under the remote control of an attacker. An attacker can use these zombie computers, can use this botnet for their own purposes, as we'll see in just a moment. Now, early botnet attackers used something called Internet Relay Chat, IRC, in order to remotely control the zombies, to give commands to them, sometimes called command and control structure. Anymore, however, that's been replaced by simply using HTTP in order to give commands. Botnets have tremendous advantages for the attackers. Why? Because a computer that's infected with a botnet still can perform its normal functions, yet the botnet simply operates in the background. Computers today, of course, are able to multitask. They can do many things simultaneously with the speed and the capability of today's CPUs. Individual could have their computer infected with the software that turns the computer into a zombie and becomes part of a botnet. Someone is sitting at the computer typing out an email message, while in the background the computer is at the same time launching attacks on other computers under the remote control of an attacker. There's no visible evidence, perhaps to me, that my computer is being used for malicious purposes in the background while I'm typing the email. It's a means for concealing the actions of an attacker. Again, happens in the background. I typically am not going to see it unless I know what I'm looking for. There are many instances of zombie computers that have been attacking other individuals for years, and the owner hasn't known that is the case. And what kind of facilitates botnets is, back in the olden days, whenever we wanted to use the internet, we had to actually use a dial-up modem and a telephone line. Our computers were not always connected. Of course, today that's completely different. All of our computers are always connected all the time, and so botnets are very readily accessible to the attackers. Don't have to worry about the computers generally being turned off and on. Yes, here's some uses of a botnet: spamming, spreading malware, attacking different types of networks, even manipulating online polls and denying services. We'll talk more about denying services in a future chapter. But it's simply to say that an infected computer can be turned into a zombie, and that zombie then can be joined with other zombies to form a botnet, and that can be used by the attacker to wreak all sort of havoc. Now, another type of malware that's designed for profit is what we call spyware. And we're going to overlap a little bit spyware and adware. Sometimes they're a little difficult to find the differences between them, but we'll do our best here. Spyware is just a general term that's used to describe software that, guess what, spies on us. And it spies on us by gathering information without our consent. So it violates our privacy. There's a group that defines spyware as tracking software that is deployed without adequate notice, consent, or control by the user. And that's a pretty good definition of it. Now, this spyware could be used for advertising. It could be used for collecting personal information. It could actually be used for changing the system's configuration. Here's a table that lists some of the technologies that are used by spyware. Spyware could automatically download software. It could do passive tracking on me. I go to specific websites. The spyware could monitor what websites I am going to. Now, it might be for a seemingly benign purpose, but for instance, I'm looking for, a new car, and I go to a variety of websites. The spyware could track the websites I'm going to and paint a pretty good picture of the type of car that I'm interested in purchasing. and all of a sudden I begin to receive mailings and emails advertising maybe another type of car to try to persuade me to change what I'm looking for. That's just kind of passive tracking technologies. Spyware also can modify my system. And again, we said it's just tracking software. Now, beyond just impacting our privacy, spyware can, in addition, maybe slow my computer down. Could make it unstable. If all of a sudden I have new browser toolbars and menus that suddenly appear, that might be an indication I've got spyware in my computer. New shortcuts come up. A hijacked homepage. How often is it that all of a sudden my homepage changes? Well, how did my homepage change in my web browser? I didn't change it. Could be an indication of spyware. If all of a sudden those annoying pop-ups all of a sudden increase in their frequency, again, could be an indication of an infection there. Now, adware is a software program that delivers, guess what, advertising content. Okay, so somewhat different than spyware. Adware delivers its advertising content, but it delivers the content in a way that may be unexpected and certainly is unwanted. Now, adware can infect the computer as a result of a virus or a worm or a Trojan, and once that adware is installed, it then is going to obviously display advertising. Might have advertising banners, might have pop-ups, might open new web browser windows at random intervals. Now, this adware could again also perform tracking of my online activities. As with spyware, there are downsides to adware. Again, it may display content that I don't want to see. These pop-up ads I have to keep closing all the time can cause me to lose productivity. May even cause my computer to slow down. And of course, these ads are simply a nuisance many times. Keyloggers. Do you ever go to a public access computer, like in a computer lab or in a public library, and use it and walk away thinking everything is good? Many times, public access computers have what are called keyloggers installed on them. As the name implies, a keylogger can be a program that captures my keystrokes. So as I sit down at this public access computer and I type away, in the background, the keylogger is capturing all of my keystrokes. This information then, perhaps once a week, is silently transmitted to the attacker, and the attacker then uses the program to filter through everything that was typed in, looking for passwords, looking for perhaps a credit card number, social security number, any sort of personal type of information. That's what's known as a keylogger. Now, keylogger doesn't have to be software. Keyloggers could be a small hardware device. This device is inserted between the computer keyboard and the connector. It's pretty unlikely it's going to be detected because that keylogger device is so very tiny. Generally speaking, if it's just a physical keylogger device, then the attacker would have to come and retrieve that device and download everything. Sometimes it could be done automatically. That is, the information sent to the attacker. Oftentimes, however, the attacker would have to come and actually remove the device. Here's an example of that keylogger. Very small device, fits in between the connection between the keyboard and the computer itself. Very hard to detect. The type of information that a keylogger can grab, of course, is really anything at all that's typed on the computer. Here's an example of a memo with some sensitive information. Keylogger software could grab all of that stuff and use it. More often than not, keyloggers in public places are not really designed to look at contents of memos, but again, they're looking for usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, that type of thing. Good rule of thumb is if you don't use that computer, if you don't own that computer, then you want to be very careful about how you use that computer. It certainly would be very questionable to use a public access computer if I was going to make an online purchase and I had to enter my credit card information, or if I had to access a specific financial institution using a password that I've set up. Good practice not to use public access computers except for the most fundamental basic types of web surfing or something like that. Never really know what's there in the background. Our second part of Chapter 2 deals with social engineering attacks. In the first part, we looked at different types of malware that is used in attacks. Remember, we looked at malware, for instance, whose primary purpose is to rapidly infect systems, malware that spreads. We looked at other types of malware whose purpose is to conceal. And we looked at a third type of category of malware that's designed to make profit for its owners. All of that malware, of course, is based on technology, obviously. Social engineering, on the other hand, doesn't use technology in order to achieve its goal. Rather, social engineering uses trickery in order to persuade individuals to surrender information to us. Here's a true example of a social engineering attack, and this actually happened. Although it was done by a group of individuals who were of a security firm, they wanted to test to see the strength of the security of an organization, and they were hired by that organization. But anyway, here's what they did. It started out by one person of this group called the company's human resource office and asked for the names of key employees. And when you know it, that office, just wanting to be friendly, gave out all that information, asked no questions. Now, as the group then walked up to the building where the company was housed, one of them pretended, oh no, I've lost the key code to the door. So what happens? A friendly employee decides to simply let them in. They then entered a secure area, and another of the group said, oh no, I misplaced my security badge, so guess what? A smiling employee opened the door for him. Now, this group knew that the chief financial officer was out of town. How did they know that? Because the chief financial officer changed his voicemail greeting message that I was going to be out of town. So the group walked unchallenged into his office and started looking for and gathering information. There is a computer that was unprotected, so they were able to look at it. They went through trash receptacles. They retrieved some useful documents. And in fact, a janitor was actually stopped and asked for something in which they could put all these documents in so they could carry them out of the building. The janitor asked no questions, simply provided something for them. Now, then one of the group's members called the company's help desk from the chief financial officer's office and pretended to be the chief financial officer and said, I desperately need my password. I've forgotten it. I'm on my way to an important meeting. Give me the password. I need it right now. Help desk, guess what? Gave out the password. So then the group left the building with complete access to the network and all the documents that they had gathered. Any technology used here other than just obviously a telephone? No technology was actually used in this attack. Social engineering is directly gathering information from individuals without using technology. Social engineering relies on our trusting and friendly nature. We typically trust individuals unless they give us some reason not to. And we want to be friendly, we want to be kind, we want to be helpful. So that enters into the equation as well. The goal of social engineering, I want to persuade the victim to give me information or to take some sort of action on my behalf. Yet my motivation for doing so obviously is that of my own personal sort of enhancement. There are many psychological approaches to social engineering. One is that of flattery or even flirtation. If I flatter someone and give them many compliments, that person may be inclined to be friendly back to me and provide the information that I'm looking for. Conformity. Sometimes, in terms of conformity, if the victim is persuaded to believe that everyone else has done this already and you haven't yet, they may surrender the information or take the action. And certainly, as we mentioned, friendliness. People just like to be friendly with each other. And based on friendliness, sometimes individuals are persuaded to take actions that if they actually stopped and thought about it, they, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. Other tricks by attackers. Oftentimes they'll only ask for small amounts of information from several different victims. Why? Because if I ask for a large amount of information from one individual, that could raise some suspicion. A few red flags might go up. But if I ask for small amounts of information from several different victims, generally not the case. Plus, the request needs to be believable. Probably it would not be believable if I tried to persuade a stranger to go into the chief financial officer's office and rummage through his desk looking for something. Probably not pretty believable. But if I were to ask just casually if the chief financial officer is on vacation this week, the person might respond, oh sure, they're gone. Well, there's some valuable information that I could use in an attack, but it's not information. My request was not unbelievable. Now, attackers are very good in terms of social engineering of pushing the envelope to the point where they get information, but it's right before the victim begins to get suspicious of anything. And oftentimes what an attacker will simply do is smile and ask for help and say, I'm confused, could you help me? Or maybe just, oh, thank you so very much. Person thinks nothing of surrendering information or taking some sort of action. Now, social engineering impersonation obviously means that the attacker impersonates someone. Generally, it's a fictitious character. And then the attacker plays out the role of that person on the victim. One that is very common is, as listed here, help desk support technician. Yep. Victim receives a phone call. Person says, I'm from the help desk. We've got a problem here. We need to reset your username and password. Could you please give me that over the phone? And the victim says, oh yeah, okay, my username and password is this. Well, the attacker has impersonated someone in order to get information. And though that sounds like who would do that, the number of cases of individuals who have done that in studies that have been done have been simply unbelievable. Another category is that of a repair person, a trusted third party, and individuals in roles of authority. An attacker will often pretend to be someone who has a relatively high degree of authority in the organization. It's very difficult for a victim to say no to someone when they think, this person is over my boss's boss, and I don't want, so attackers impersonate those who have roles of authority. Another type of social engineering besides impersonation is that of phishing. This is really one of the most common forms. Phishing is sending an email or displaying a web announcement. It falsely claims to be from a legitimate enterprise, maybe like a bank. Its goal is to trick the user into surrendering private information. For example, a user may be asked to respond to an email or go to a website where they have to update their personal information, password, credit card number, social security number, bank account number. But actually that website is an imposter site. It's set up to impersonate the real site, and it's managed by an attacker. So if someone goes there, surrenders that information, the attacker, of course, has grabbed it. There are some variations on phishing. Farming, instead of asking the user to visit a fraudulent website, farming automatically directs the user to the fake site. Spear phishing is directed at specific users. Now, oftentimes a phishing attack is a very broad attack that might encompass hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users. Spear phishing, on the other hand, is targeted at specific users. And the email in spear phishing is generally customized to the recipient. Might have their name, personal information, to make it appear very legitimate. Whaling. Instead of going after the small fish, whaling targets the big fish, perhaps wealthy individuals who might have large sums of money. Here's an example of a phishing message. Now, the reason for displaying this is, in times past, it used to be emphasized that there are some ways you can recognize a phishing message, and here are some of the ones that are listed here. The last one, perhaps, is the one that really stands out, in that there's always an urgency of the message. You've got to update your information right now. You must do this immediately. Well, the reason for that is trying to get the individual to do something without pausing to think about it, of course. However, today, phishing is so refined that it's very difficult to distinguish fake from legitimate. I, on occasion, receive emails from financial organizations of whom I have a relationship, have an account, and I got to tell you, it's just very difficult to attempt to distinguish, is this real or is this a phishing attack? Now, slightly different is something called spam. Spam is unsolicited email. Spam has a significant impact on the productivity of workers, but it's also one of the vehicles for distributing viruses and keyloggers and other types of malware. One variation of spam is something called spam, which is instant messaging instead of simply email. There are different types of spam that are designed to circumvent text-based spam filters. Now, because of the huge volume of spam, and some organizations say that 90% of the email they received is actually spam. Incredible. 9 out of 10 email messages are spam. Spam filters are designed to scan through those email messages looking for key words to indicate that the message is probably spam. It's looking for things like Rolex watch or Viagra or whatever the case may be. So, in order to get around this, attackers use a variety of techniques. One is something called image spam. Image spam doesn't contain text of what they're trying to sell, but it contains nonsense text in order to get past the spam filter. Here's an example of image spam. It's got an unsuspecting subject line, but the body of it itself is actually an image, like a GIF. Why do that? Because a spam filter cannot look through the words in an image and discover pharmacy or online or Viagra. But if an email came in and it only had the image and no words, the spam filter would catch it, saying, aha, I found spam. So what spammers have done is they've added down here at the bottom, as we can see, nonsense text. They might even sometimes pull text out of a book, something like that. This text has nothing to do, of course, with the email itself, but it's simply there so that the spam filter won't say, oh, there's no text in this email, so it might be spam. Other types of techniques to bypass, something called GIF layering. Here, image spam is divided into multiple images, and each piece of the message is divided, and then it's layered to create a complete and legible image. There's something called word splitting that horizontally separates words so they can be read by the human eye. Geometric variants. This uses something called speckling in different colors so that no two spam emails appear to be the same. We have some figures of GIF layering. of word splitting and of that geometric variance that we spoke about. Now, sometimes attackers will use a hoax as a first step in an attack. A hoax, of course, is a false warning, maybe contained in an email message that pretends to come from the IT department. Hoax says, oh, there's a really bad virus out there and it's circulating. What you need to do is you need to change these security settings. Well, actually, in changing security settings, the individual is decreasing the level of security instead of increasing it. Or they may be told to erase certain files. That will then prompt a call to the help desk, and of course in the email message it conveniently has the number of the help desk, which is not the number of the real help desk, but the number to the attacker's phone. So the individual erases files, causes instability on their computer. They call up the help desk number in the email instead of the legitimate number, and lo and behold, the attacker then convinces them to do something. Now, not all social engineering relies on psychological manipulation. Others simply rely on physical acts. I'm taking advantage of user actions to get them to do something. Two of the most common are dumpster diving and tailgating. Now, dumpster diving, of course, is simply digging through trash receptacles to find information that's useful in an attack. Very common approach. The other is tailgating. This is following behind an authorized individual through an access door. You know, organizations spend tens of thousands of dollars to create access doors that only authorized individuals can get through because they have a special card or they know a certain code. However, it's very possible for someone to closely follow behind an approved person and gain entrance into a secure area. This is some of the information from dumpster diving and why it could be useful. Calendars, flash drives, memos, organizational charts, phone directories, policy manuals, system manuals. In and of itself, all of this seems very, how would that be beneficial to me at all? But in reality, they could be very beneficial to an attacker. We were talking about tailgating a moment ago. Again, there are different methods of tailgating. The tailgater might say, oh, please hold the door for a moment, but in reality, the tailgater actually does not have the authorization to enter through that door. They may wait outside the door for an authorized person to leave and then slip in. Shoulder surfing also fits into this category as well, where I can simply casually observe the keystrokes that an individual enters on a keypad code, and then I can gain access through that door. Very common as well. Let's summarize what we've talked about. We said that malware is software that enters a computer system without the owner's knowledge or consent. Malware that spreads includes computer viruses and worms. Malware that conceals, Trojans, rootkits, logic bombs, backdoors. Malware that profits, botnets, spyware, adware, keyloggers. We said that social engineering is a means of gathering information for an attack. And types of social engineering include phishing and impersonation, dumpster diving, tailgating. These were the objectives of this chapter: to describe the difference between a virus and a worm, to list the type of malware that conceal, identify types of malware designed to profit, types of social engineering psychological attacks, and social engineering physical attacks. There we have it for Chapter 2, Malware and Social Engineering Attacks, Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition.